A lifeless body, hidden beneath a hotel bed. How did it get there? Welcome to Rust Evidence. I am your host, Silas Wren. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Your comments mean the world to me. I always love reading them. Now let's dive into the mystery. The rain had been falling since morning, a thin, persistent drizzle that left the cobblestones of Boulevard Richard Lenoir glistening like wet fish scales. Chief Inspector Maigret sat at his usual place by the window of the Brasserie Dauphine, a large hand wrapped around a thick glass of beer that was already half warm. He was not in a hurry. He rarely was. It was late afternoon, that melancholy hour when the café was nearly empty and the streets seemed to exhale after the bustle of the day. He watched a delivery boy on a bicycle pass by, his shoulders hunched under a parcel wrapped in waxed paper, and then a woman tugging at a stubborn dachshund that refused to leave a puddle. Maigret smoked slowly, his pipe resting at an angle that seemed more natural than deliberate. He had promised Madame Maigret that he would be home early for dinner. She was preparing a stew, and had reminded him, half stern and half tender, not to arrive late as he had the night before. Still, he lingered. He often did. The small rituals of waiting, of watching the city, were as much a part of his work as any official summons. The café doors creaked when they opened, letting in the smell of damp wool and the faint sound of traffic on the boulevard. Across the room, a young man in an ill-fitting suit shifted uncomfortably at a table, his eyes darting toward the counter as if he lacked the courage to order another coffee. Maigret noticed without meaning to. He always noticed such things: the nervous tapping of a foot, the way a man's gaze avoided the mirror, the unease that clung like a second coat. His watch said nearly 5. He should leave. But just as he pushed his glass aside and reached for his overcoat, the telephone behind the bar rang. The waiter, with a glance toward Maigret, answered, then hesitated before walking over with the receiver cradled awkwardly in his hand. "It's for you." "Inspector." Maigret felt a small weight settle in his chest. It was always like this. A quiet moment disturbed by something that would not wait. He rose slowly, the pipe still between his teeth, and took the receiver. "Maigret," he said simply. The voice on the other end belonged to Inspector Lognan, nicknamed Inspector Hard Luck by his colleagues for reasons that needed little explanation. His tone was as dreary as the rain outside. "There's a body, Chief, a boarding house on Rue de Turenne. A woman cleaning one of the rooms found it not an hour ago." A pause, then in a lower voice, "Under the bed in room 6. For a moment Maigret said nothing. He could hear the clatter of crockery from the kitchen, the shuffle of the nervous young man still debating his coffee. The drizzle pressed against the café window like a hand that would not lift. "Very well," Maigret said finally. "Don't touch anything. I'll be there." He set down the receiver, buttoned his heavy overcoat, and tipped his head to the waiter. Outside, the rain greeted him like an old companion. He lit his pipe again and began to walk, not briskly, but with the steady pace of a man accustomed to carrying both his own weight and the secrets of others. Behind him, the café returned to its quiet rhythm. Ahead, the city seemed to thicken, its narrow streets promising stories that people would rather not tell. Room 6. A body under a bed. Already Maigret felt the faint stirrings of unease, not from the fact of death itself, that was never new, but from the choice of hiding. Under a bed, as though the murderer wished both concealment and intimacy, a grotesque parody of childhood fears. By the time he turned onto Rue de Turenne, his pipe glowing in the misty air, he had the peculiar certainty that this case would not shout its truth, but whisper it, in silences, in the way people looked at one another, in what they chose not to say. The Rue de Turenne was narrower than he remembered, and the glow from the shops made a greasy ribbon on the wet pavement. A police van crouched by a doorway, where a glass panel announced in flaking gold letters, "Pension Bordier, Chambre Meublée." Under the striped awning, Inspector Lognan waited with his collar turned up, his expression already apologetic, as if the rain itself were another failure for which he was responsible. "You took your time," he said without conviction. "I walked," Maigret answered. He shook the rain from his hat and did not hurry to go inside. He looked up at the windows, 4 floors of yellow rectangles, some with curtains half drawn, one with a geranium that had given up and gone brown. The smell of cooked cabbage drifted out when Lognan opened the door. The hall had the damp, old house odor that no amount of scrubbing could disguise. Floorboards sprinkled with sawdust, a black iron stove humming like a contented cat, an umbrella stand suffering a family of dripping canes. On the wall beside the mailboxes, a framed set of Règlement de la Maison was hung a little crooked. No visitors after 10, no spirits in the rooms. Rent in advance on Thursdays. Somewhere upstairs a radio murmured a dance tune too softly for dancing. Second floor, Lognon said. He tried for a brisk tone and failed. Madame Bordier found it at 4:30. She says she was changing the sheets. She? Maigret asked. The landlady, widow. She says she keeps a decent house. He said it as if that claim was itself suspect. On the landing, a uniformed agent stood by a door painted the color of diluted milk. The number 6 was brass and slightly askew. The corridor was narrow enough that 2 men would have to turn their shoulders to pass. Behind one of the doors there was a dry little cough, like someone trying not to be heard. Another door opened a crack. An eye measured them and retreated. The faint smell of boiled potatoes and something sweet, vanilla or cheap perfume, floated over everything. Madame Bordier came forward, wiping her hands on her apron with small, decisive gestures. She was compact, grey hair scraped into a bun, the kind of woman who pressed a mouth flat to keep from saying what she thought. Inspector, she said, I run a respectable place. If there is a scandal, it will not be on account of my negligence. Of course, Maigret said gently. He let the silence sit beside them until her breathing calmed. You found him? I knocked. He never answers when he goes out. I keep spare linens in the cupboard, and I change them midweek whether the gentlemen complain or not. It is my reputation. I went in and her eyes flickered to the door. She swallowed. I saw a shoe. Under the bed. Men leave things. But 2 shoes is not leaving. I bent down. She had the air of someone who has told this already 2 or 3 times and will continue to tell it, polishing it a little with each telling until she believes it herself. Maigret nodded toward the door and she stepped aside. Room 6 was plain and mean as a rulebook, a washstand with a cracked basin, an iron bed with a coverlet faded to the color of weak tea, a square table where a single glass left a wet ring that had dried in the shape of the sun. The window looked onto a courtyard with its gallery of drain pipes. Damp bloomed under the wallpaper in the corners like bruises. He did not go straight to the bed. He stood by the threshold and let the room present itself. A cheap brown coat hung from the peg. It was dry, though outside the rain had been steady all day. On the table lay a book of railway timetables, the edges softened by use. In the ashtray 2 kinds of cigarette ends, fat, dark stubs pressed flat, and 2 slender cork-tipped butts broken neatly, almost dainty. A faint breath of violet came from somewhere. On the washstand a square of gauze dusted with pale powder clung to the edge of the mirror. Did you touch anything? He asked. Only to look under, Lognon said, already ashamed. I didn't pull him out. The doctor hasn't come. The doctor hasn't come. Maigret knelt with a slow care that made no sound. He lifted the coverlet's hem between 2 fingers and looked into the bed's shadow. Shoes, yes. Black, polished too enthusiastically. The kind of shine that speaks of habit rather than vanity. Beyond them a trouser leg, a sock, a calf. He did not need to see the face to register the stillness, the peculiar refusal of a body to be merely at rest. The dust under the bed was disturbed in arcs, as if someone had first pushed, then hesitated, then pushed again. The shoes were lined neatly heel to heel. Whoever had hidden him had found time or a need to put things in order. He let the coverlet fall. Who is the tenant? Monsieur Leclerc, Madame Bordier said, seizing the chance to be useful. Or that is the name he gave. A travelling man for razors and combs, courteous, paid in cash, quiet. Age? 40, perhaps. Hard to say. He kept his hat low. There is no hat, Maigret said. He glanced toward the peg again, as if to give the observation somewhere to live. No hat, no umbrella in a week of rain. People on the boulevard clung to their hats as to their dignity. One did not go without. He came in last night, she said quickly. At 8. With a parcel, cardboard. I was at my desk. He said good evening. He went up. I did not see him leave this morning. Who else lives on this floor? Room 5 is Mademoiselle Darras, a seamstress. Room 7 is a commercial traveller, but he is away. Room 4 is Monsieur and Madame Rondeau. He works at the post office. They keep to themselves, she paused. And room 3 is empty this week. I am fumigating. From the corridor came the soft scuff of a slipper and the impression of someone listening from an inch away. The door of room 5 opened just enough to frame a pale oval face, hair pinned in a tired coil, the corners of the mouth red with cold. The eyes were large, careful, with that blankness that hides too much noticing. It's nothing. Mademoiselle, Madame Bordier called more sharply than necessary, to assure everyone present that she was mistress of her staircase. We'll speak with everyone, Maigret said. But not yet. He crossed to the table and touched the rim of the glass. It was dry to the finger, but when he lifted it, the underside left a damp circle younger than the day's weather. He raised it to his nose. Water, perhaps tap, no wine. On the saucer beside it, a sugar cube half crushed, as if someone had begun to sweeten coffee and changed their mind. 2 cups on the tray, one with a brown ring, one with the faintest film of powder along the lip. Lognon looked at the ashtray with the heavy suspicion of a man hoping for a robbery. Wallet? In the coat, Maigret said without checking. Then, after an unhurried moment, he checked anyway. The wallet was there. A few notes, some coins, a ticket stub from the day before, and a folded photograph of a woman not pretty and not young, wearing a hat with a ribbon past its fashion. She was looking away from the camera, which made the picture stubbornly unhelpful. Not robbery, Lognon muttered, as if disappointed at the world's refusal to be simple. Perhaps not. Maigret returned the wallet to the pocket and smoothed the coat as if he had just ironed it with a warm hand. He drew the curtain aside with the back of his knuckles. The courtyard glistened. On the gallery opposite, a child in a red cardigan looked back solemnly and then vanished into a doorway. On the sill, dust had gathered in a grey, even fur. The window had not been opened today. The air in the room was heavy with the day's breath. No draught lifted the edges of the coverlet. Whoever had done this had not needed air or had not dared to seek it. Madame, he said, still looking at the courtyard, your gentlemen receive visitors? She stiffened. I do not tolerate women in the rooms. Only relatives and then at the desk. Of course. He let the silence fill again, and this time she rushed to cover it. Sometimes, she said, Mademoiselle Darras's cousin brings fabric swatches. They talk in the corridor. And Monsieur Leclerc? He was a man alone, she said. He did not ask. Maigret's eyes moved to the slender, cork-tipped stubs. They could have been bought anywhere. They could have belonged to anyone. And yet a certain way of crushing ash, an impatience visible in a gesture, a habit of standing too long at the mirror with powder still in the air. These were more revealing to him than fingerprints. He took his pipe from his pocket, but did not light it. The room disapproved of smoke just now. We'll wait for the doctor, he said. We'll keep the corridor quiet, and we'll speak to your tenants in the dining room one at a time. We'll begin with Mademoiselle Darras. But give her a cup of tea first, if she'll take it. Madame Bordier blinked. Tea? It helps some people talk, he said. On the landing, the uniformed agent shifted his weight and the stair creaked, the way old houses confess the years. Maigret let his hand rest for a moment on the iron bedstead, feeling the chill of the metal ease into his palm. The facts would come, the name, the time, the doctor's opinion. But already something in him objected to a detail he could not yet name. Not a contradiction, those he welcomed, but a harmony that was too perfect. Shoes placed neatly, a glass wiped and left just damp enough to look honest, a coat hanging dry in a week of rain. Joyce smelled not of guilt precisely, of someone trying to imitate the ordinary. He stepped into the corridor where the wallpaper flowers were wilting in their printed vase, and he listened. A radio ticked its way through a waltz. A handkerchief coughed. Somewhere, a teaspoon touched a saucer with an almost polite tap. He could wait. He had always been good at that. And while he waited, the house would tell him who among its occupants was pretending hardest to be themselves. The doctor arrived with his coat collar up and his bag clamped in the crook of his elbow, a neat little man with a breath that clouded the corridor. He did not shake hands. He nodded to Maigret as if they shared an old and undemanding acquaintance, and ducked into room 6 with a small sound of reluctance in his throat. Maigret did not follow him at once. He waited in the landing's weak light, listening to the faint scrape of chair legs in the dining room where Madame Bordier was laying down cups. The smell of boiled potatoes had given way to tea. When the doctor reappeared, he spoke without embellishment. Male, 40 to 45. Death likely last night between 9 and 11. No obvious wounds. Ligature marks, thin, narrow. A belt or a cord. He was moved afterward. The lividity is wrong for where he lies. He glanced toward the door with professional impatience. I'll confirm at the morgue. Thank you, Maigret said. You'll have your signature on the forms downstairs. The doctor nodded as if that at least was something punctual and left, wiping a drop from his cheek with his wrist. Longyon shifted, hopeful again. Strangled. So a strong man. Or a careful one, Maigret said. He let the word hang between them, then moved toward the dining room without looking to see if Longyon followed. The dining room tried to be cheerful. There checked cloth, a vase with 2 tired chrysanthemums that leaned toward one another like conspirators, a calendar showing a beach in August, though Paris would not see such light for months. Mademoiselle Darras sat at the end of the table with her back straight, her hands folded like a pupil in a school photograph. The steam from the tea made her face look younger than at the door. Up close, you could see the tiny nicks where needles had pricked the sides of her index fingers, and the faint dusting of powder that had settled into the fine down along her jaw. The scent of violet hovered just above her chair, a modest halo. Thank you for seeing us, mademoiselle, Maigret said, taking the chair opposite, not too near. I'm sorry for the disturbance. It's nothing, she said. And then, because that was obviously untrue, she added, it's very unfortunate for Madame Bordier. For everyone, Maigret said mildly. He looked at her hands, and her hands, feeling his gaze, pressed more tightly together. You work at home? I sew for a shop on the Rue des Francs Bourgeois. They send the work. I do hems and alterations in the mornings, bodices in the afternoon. In the evening I finish what's left. It's quieter then. You've lived here long? A year. It's a respectable house. She turned a little, as if to offer Madame Bordier's good name in her own defense. You know Monsieur Leclerc? Her eyes moved without moving to the side, as if she glanced around the memory of a doorframe. He was in the corridor sometimes. He said good evening. He had a nice voice. You spoke often. No, I don't. We said good evening. Maigret stirred his tea with a slow spoon and did not drink. Last night between 9 and 11. She looked at the spoon as if it might tell her the time. I was working. I had a delivery to finish. Madame Bordier will say. She went by at 9 with a broom. I had the radio on, low. She cleared her throat. I heard him come in around 8. His step. Some men try to walk softly and it makes more noise. He was like that. And after 8, she hesitated, then shook her head as if trusting her memory would betray her. I don't remember. Steps go up and down in this house. The rondos go to bed early. The trader on 7 snores when he's here. I noticed the radio more than the steps. The announcer has a lisp at 9:30. The doctor says Monsieur Leclerc died around then. He watched the information land. It made no sound when it did. She looked neither shocked nor relieved. She looked as if he had told her the price of apples somewhere else in the city. Did you smell anything? He asked. Tobacco? Perfume? Perfume? She touched a finger to the side of her neck and came away with the smallest smear of powder. And then, seeing it on her skin, she folded her hands again to hide the evidence. It's a boarding house, she said. People smell of what they can afford. You smoke, mademoiselle? When I have money. She half smiled, a movement barely there. It makes the stitches go straighter. What sort? Cork tips, she said, too quickly, then in a smaller voice, the cheap ones. Her eyes dropped to the ashtray where Madame Bordier had laid a teaspoon. Maigret let his gaze follow hers only long enough to be polite, not accusatory. Did Monsieur Leclerc receive visitors? Maigret asked. Not that I saw, she answered to the tablecloth. He kept his hat low. There is no hat in his room. Her head went up a fraction. For the first time she looked directly into his face, as if she could find out from him what she herself had not seen. Then he left. He did not smile. Not far. The teaspoon touched the saucer with that same small, polite tap he had heard through the wall. It seemed to reassure Madame Bordier, who hovered near the door with a cloth in her hand, that the dining room was again under her control. I tell my gentlemen no women, she said, a regulation recited often enough to have worn smooth. Of course, Maigret said, and to Mademoiselle Darras. Your cousin with the swatches. Did he come last night? No, he comes on Thursdays. She held still a moment, then allowed herself a breath. There was someone on the stairs at 10. Light steps. I thought of a child, but children don't keep to the wall like that. The child in the courtyard? Maigret asked, as if the idea had only just then come to him. Red cardigan, she frowned. Madame Rondeau's niece wore something red in the spring. Not now. He stood, the tea untouched. Thank you, he said. If you remember a sound or a smell, even if you think it's nothing, tell Madame Bordier and she'll tell me. As they moved back into the corridor, the wallpaper's printed flowers seemed already more faded. Lognon, who had stood as if at attention and then forgotten he was standing at attention, rubbed the back of his neck. She smokes cork tips. So do many, Maigret said. He did not look at Lognon. He looked at the door to room 4, behind which he could feel the compact gravity of a married life, and at the white rectangle on the wall where a picture had once hung and left a paler ghost. He rapped. A shuffle answered, then the wary clink of a chain, and Monsieur Rondeau's face appeared in the crack, a face built to doubt officialdom. Post office closes at 6, Rondeau said, by way of greeting. His wife hovered behind him, a small dark shape with a damp cloth in her hand that smelled of vinegar. We won't keep you, Maigret said. He did not step over the threshold until Rondeau, after a battle with himself, unhooked the chain. Inside, the room was knitted together by tidiness. A pair of slippers lined up like schoolchildren. A clock that was 5 minutes fast. A framed photograph of a military company where the men had all been younger and the grass brighter. Madame Rondeau was the cough he had heard earlier. She suppressed one now as if ashamed of its small betrayal. You heard anything last night? He asked, not sitting. The radio, Rondeau said. Always the radio. He seemed to believe this was evidence against someone, though not himself. Footsteps. It's a house, he added triumphantly, as if steps were an accusation he could hurl back at the world. Voices? Maigret asked. Madame Rondeau, whose eyes flicked to her husband before they brightened toward Maigret, said, A woman. Perhaps at 9. Soft voice. I thought she said wait in the corridor. Or late. It's the same when you're washing. Rondeau made a small derisive sound that was not quite a laugh. Women hear women everywhere. Did you smell violets? Maigret asked, and instantly regretted the precision. Too soon for precision could make people decide what they had smelled. Madame Rondeau smiled in spite of herself. I smell cabbage, she said. Back in the corridor, Maigret stood still long enough to feel the house's pulse slow around him. He went once more into room 6, not because he expected to find something new, but because rooms surrendered a different truth after voices had passed through them. The glass still left its damp ring. The coat still hung dry, obstinately dry, as if it had declared itself an alibi. He opened the wardrobe. Nothing but a shirt folded with the fussy care of a man who has owned too few shirts. No parcel. The cardboard box Madame Bordier had seen was nowhere. He knelt again, feeling the ache in his knees that reminded him of the years, and drew the coverlet up just enough to see the edge of a belt peeping from under the mattress, a cheap leather that had taken too much polish and cracked. It was not the right kind for a ligature. Too wide, too stiff. Still, someone had fussed with things, tucked and arranged, the way a child tidies a room and makes disorder gleam. He stood, slipped the photograph from the wallet once more, and balanced it on his fingertips. The woman with the hat ribbon looking away. Not pretty, not young, not the kind of picture a man displays, rather one he keeps folded, because it belongs to a place inside him that is older than his address. He put it back. In the ashtray, a thread the color of pale rose clung to a cigarette stub, too fine to have come from a man's shirt. He pinched it free and laid it on the tablecloth like a small road he might later follow. In the doorway, Lognon shifted again. We'll search the other rooms, he said. In time, Maigret answered. He looked toward the stairs. Somewhere below, the bell at the front door gave a single discreet ring, and in the silence that followed, the house seemed to lean inward, listening. Whoever had come in knew how to make as little noise as possible. He found that he was not thinking of a strong man, nor even a careful one, but of someone whose life had taught them to move along walls and keep their voice close to their throat. He took his pipe out and balanced it in his palm. The violets in the air were already fading. The next voice would tell him how much of the truth had been tidied, and how much could still be found in what people chose to leave out. The bell gave its discreet ring again, and Madame Bordier, who had been pretending to dust a place already clean, startled as if the sound had found her unprepared. Maigret did not move at once. He let the house settle after the ripple and listened to the brief hush that followed, like breath being held on 3 different landings. Then he started down the stairs without hurry, the soles of his shoes making a measured talk with the wood. The woman on the threshold held a small umbrella closed tightly in both hands, as if it might otherwise open itself and betray her. She was not young. She wore a felt hat with a narrow ribbon that had once been pink and was now the pale of old petals. The rain had left a dotted veil on the shoulders of her coat, not soaking but respectable, as if she had stepped from a cab under the awning and paused long enough to let the weather mark her honestly. Her perfume arrived before her voice, a modest violet, the sort that clings to scarves and lingered in corridors. "Good evening," she said, taking in the hall the iron stove, the umbrella stand with the dripping canes. Her eyes touched on the presence of the police van outside, then slipped away as if the thought that followed were impolite. "I'm looking for Monsieur Leclerc." Madame Bordier stiffened to the height of her principles. "Visitors are received at the desk only," she began, then hesitated because the rule felt too bright for the hour. She glanced at Maigret the way people glance at the man who can decide whether a thing is allowed. "You know him well?" Maigret asked. She looked at him without looking. "He expects me," she said too quickly. And then, tidying the sentence with a small cough, "He expected me yesterday, perhaps today. I'm not sure. Your name?" he asked. She seemed to consider the true one and put it away. "Madame Villon," she said. Her gloved hands tightened around the umbrella until the fabric creaked. "I left a message for him. At the tobacconist on the corner." He would know. Maigret did not contradict her. He had not sent anyone to the tobacconist. The truth of such a message would be tested later. For now, the rhythm of her sentences mattered more. He nodded toward the dining room. "So you can wait here, madam. It's warmer." He let his voice carry the courtesy of a cafe rather than a station. "Perhaps a cup of tea?" She obeyed with a relief she tried not to show. In the dining room she sat where Mademoiselle Darras had been, and touched the brim of her hat, as if to reassure herself that it was still the right sort of hat for a woman to be wearing among strangers. When Madame Bordier brought tea, she reached automatically into her handbag and produced a packet of cork-tipped cigarettes. She hesitated, met the landlady's eye, and replaced them with a sigh that apologized to the house. "You came yesterday?" Maigret asked. "I meant to," she said. "My sister was ill. The tram was crowded. I went as far as St. Paul and came back. Yet you left a message. Yes, I left a message earlier." She smoothed the glove on her left hand with the knuckles of her right and left a faint bloom of powder on the dark leather. Her voice wanted to be businesslike and could not quite manage it. "Monsieur Leclerc and I have an arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" She lifted her eyes to his face and then to the chrysanthemums on the table, as if the flowers might accept a confession more kindly than a man would. "He takes certain goods for me to clients. I keep a small shop, not far near the temple, hair tonics, shaving soap. My husband, when he was—" She stopped and changed the sentence. "It's easier for a man to knock on barber doors. He has the way of it. I pay him a commission." Maigret turned his spoon once and set it down. "You are a widow." "Yes," she said, and the word did not ask for sympathy. 5 years. And yesterday he did not come for his commission." Her gaze slid from the flowers to the doorway, where the corridor's faded paper showed a pattern of roses that had lost their color. "He was to return a box," she said finally. "Cardboard, tied with string. If he had visited all 3 addresses, there would be nothing to return. It was not valuable," she added quickly, as if any measure of value might place her on the wrong side of the rules. "Just samples. Brushes, some small bottles." She glanced at Madame Bordier, who was polishing the same place on the sideboard and not listening. "He does not like to carry a case. He says cases make people think of salesmen." "Did you last see him when?" "Tuesday," she said at once, with relief at a question that had a fixed answer. 5:30. He wore his brown coat, a hat." She smiled with a kind of weary loyalty one gives to a fault that has become familiar. "He carries it more than he wears it. He says it presses here." She touched the place above her ear. "He keeps it under his arm. That way it doesn't get wet." "There is no hat in his room," Maigret said. He kept his voice flat without accusation. She looked at him again in that sidelong way and then away, as if the fact of the hat had gone where things go when you cannot think what to do with them. Her fingers strayed to the handbag and then withdrew. A moment later, as if the idea had occurred to him and not to her, he asked, "You smoke?" "When I am at ease," she said, and smiled without pleasure. "Not often." He slid the ashtray an inch toward her. "Perhaps it will help the tea." He watched how she took the cigarette, how she rolled it lightly to settle the tobacco, how she leaned to the match, not the clumsy lean of an occasional smoker, but a practiced one. When she tapped the ash, she crushed the stub neatly in the center, leaving a clean rim. In room 6, the dainty butts had been broken, not crushed, but she might break them when she was nervous, crush them when she was being careful, or the reverse. People were not laws. They belonged to their moments. "Madame Villon," he said, "if he came yesterday or did not, what would he have said to you?" She took a breath that made the violet rise and fall. He would have said the barbers are slow to pay in winter, that they stand in their doors and talk about weather and prices, and do not invite him to sit, because men with cases are always standing. He would have asked me for an advance, and would you have given it? She looked at him, finally, directly, with a frankness that did not suit her hat. "If I had it," she said. "Sometimes I have it." He did not ask about the photograph in the wallet, the woman with the ribbon hat. He looked instead at the packet of cigarettes she had put away. The paper was frayed at one corner, as if tugged by a small anxious habit. There was a thread caught under the flap, pale as a faded rose. "Do you know anyone else in the house?" he asked. "The tenants?" She shook her head. "I keep to my shop." "You didn't come last night after 8? "No." The word came too fast and sat between them like a coin on a table. He did not pick it up. He let it stay. After a moment she added, "I waited in a cafe. It was raining. When he didn't come, I went home." She searched her memory and presented it politely. "The waiter had a mole on his tongue," she offered, a detail too small to be invented at speed. Maigret rose. "If he returns," he said, "you will tell him to wait here. To wait for me." She stood too, her chair like a breath leaving the room. "He is in some trouble," she said, and it was not a question. "There has been an incident," he said. He had used that phrase often enough that it no longer felt like a lie or a kindness, merely a place where truth would be measured later. "We are finding out what it is." She nodded and took a step that meant to be toward the door and paused. "If he left a parcel," she said in a voice that had gone careful again, "I will take it back." "It belongs to me." "We have not found any parcel," Maigret said. Her shoulders moved in a small failure of resignation. When she had gone, the violet lingered in the dining room and seemed now less a scent than an idea. Longnon, who had taken up a position by the stove and warmed his impatience, said, "Shall I send a man to the tobacconist?" "In a moment," Maigret said. He took the ashtray and turned it, as if it might show a different face to the light. "First to the cafes within a block. Ask for a waiter with a mole on his tongue." Longnon blinked. "Chief, if he exists, he will remember whom he served and when. If he doesn't, he will tell us that too." He placed the ashtray exactly where Madame Villon had left it, and looked at the chair she had vacated. "And send someone to the barber addresses if we can find them. Her shop will have a billhead, quietly." He climbed the stairs again, feeling the house resume its breathing as the door below closed. In room 6 he opened the wardrobe once more for no reason he could name, and this time noticed, pressed into the back seam, a narrow groove, as if string had bitten into the wood. Someone had tied something here, perhaps hastily, perhaps in the dark, and then worked it free again. He lifted the mattress with 2 fingers, and discovered, laid along the slat, a length of thin cord cut cleanly at one end, still smelling faintly of soap. It could have come from a parcel, or from a life where things were bound and unbound until they changed their shape to fit. He did not call for Longnon. He laid the cord flat on the table and sat for a while with his big hands on either side of it. The room made its small sounds, water ticking in the pipes, the courtyard's distant whisper, a radio changing stations by accident. In another house on another street, a woman was waiting for a man to bring back a box with brushes in it. Here a man had been placed under a bed with his shoes lined neatly. Between those 2 facts, there was a corridor where voices spoke softly, and someone had moved along the wall at 10 o'clock at night, as if they had always done so. He rose at last and went out to the landing, where the printed roses were losing their fight with the damp. He had the feeling, as clear as hunger, that the person who would tell him the truth would not do it to save themselves, but to protect a version of ordinary life they believed could be restored by tidying. He could wait for that belief to break on its own. Waiting had always been his way. Outside, the rain slackened, and on the gallery opposite, the child in the red cardigan appeared again, looking solemnly at the door of room 6, as if it were a stage where the next scene would begin only when the grown-ups stopped, pretending they did not know their lines. He asked Madame Bordier for the keys to room 3. She frowned as if the number itself were an accusation. "It's fumigating," she said, but the words lacked force. The house had had its share of authority for one evening. "It will do the smoke no harm to be looked at," he said, and held out his hand. Her keys came reluctantly, with a small clatter that suggested they preferred their hook. The door yielded to a breath of stale chemicals and shut curtains. A saucer sat on the table with a greyed crust of crystals that had long since given up their battle with moths. On the boards a film of dust lay untroubled, except for a neat rectangle the size of a hatbox or a small parcel, its edges sharply honest against the rest. He did not touch the table. He stood until his eyes found the other changes. 2 faint half-moons on the floor close to the skirting, where someone had shifted their weight and kept to the wall, and the ghost of a string line on the chair back. A dent as thin as a remembered thought. He opened the window a hand's width and closed it again. The sill's dust took his fingertip like paper takes an ink, except where, an inch from the catch, a clean oval marked where another finger had pressed. He smelled nothing of violets here. The room refused everything except its own age. Everything except its own age. "Who has a key to this besides you?" he asked, returning the door to its sulks. "No one," she said too quickly. "Except the fumigator when he comes." "When was that?" "Last week." She flinched at her own precision. "Perhaps the week before. He writes me a slip." "We'll look at the slip," he said, as if slips were as revealing as voices. "Leave the door locked." On the gallery across the courtyard, the child in the red cardigan was still there, elbows on the rail, chin in his hands, as if the afternoon were a performance with too many pauses. When Maigret stepped into the damp air, the child did not run. The boy's eyes were solemn, the kind of solemnity that comes from being told often to be quiet in houses with thin walls. "What's your name?" Maigret asked, not loudly. "Paul," the child said, and lifted his chin another inch. "You live there?" Maigret nodded toward the opposite door. "With Aunt," Paul said. "Aunt says don't lean." "I'm not leaning." He demonstrated a posture that would satisfy no aunt. "You have good ears, Paul." Paul considered whether this was an accusation and found that it wasn't. "There was a lady," he said at once. "At night? At what time?" Maigret asked, because the number mattered less than the confidence. "When the radio man says the numbers," he said, and then, to prove he listened, 22. 10 o'clock, Maigret said. "What did the lady do?" "She put her feet on the sides," he said, and Maigret saw in his mind the movement that had left the half-moons in room 3. She went like this. He flattened his body along the rail in a pantomime of wall-hugging that belonged to the natural history of children and cats. She had a square with strings. Then she didn't. She didn't. She left it there. He pointed not to room 6 but 2 doors away uncertainly, as children point when the memory is of a place as much as a number. Then she came again later. She went slow, like when you have coins in your pocket and don't want them to sing. What did she smell like? "Like the soap in Aunt's drawer," he said, wrinkling his nose. "Not cabbage. Did the lady look at you?" "She did this." He pressed 2 fingers gently to the air, the universal sign to keep a secret smaller than yourself. "She said shh like a mouse." "Was it the lady from downstairs?" "The one with the hat." "She has a hat," he said, triumphant at recognizing a feature he could be proud of. "She keeps it here." He lifted his hand and touched the place above his ear where Madame Villon had said the brim pressed. It could have been coincidence, or the way grown-ups fussed with their hair when worried. Still, the gesture landed with the clean sound of a pebble finding water. "Thank you," Maigret said. He did not offer a coin. Adults with coins taught children to say what adults wanted. He rapped lightly on the Rondeau's door. Madame Rondeau came at once, her cloth in her hand as if she had been doing penance to the sideboard. "May Paul sit in for a cup of milk?" he asked. "It's chilly." She looked at the boy and softened. "Of course," she said. "Come, Paul, but don't lean." When the child had gone, the courtyard felt older. He stayed with it a moment, looking up at the black backs of the drain pipes. A man who tidied and arranged would have laid a parcel in room 3 and come again to remove it. A woman who believed in order would have done the same. The house did not vote. Steps sounded on the stairs, brisk, apologetic. Lognan came in with damp shoulders and the look of a man who had collected facts that did not yet form a wall. The tobacconist, he said, never took a message for Leclerc. He says he would have remembered. The cafes. There is a waiter with a mole at a place by St. Paul. He remembers a woman with a felt hat yesterday between 7 and 8. She had tea and asked twice for the time, as if she were practicing patience. He doesn't know her. Good, Maigret said, as if contradictions were good. And the shop? Her cobweb of tonics and little glass bottles near the temple, Lognan said. Madame Villon, as she calls herself, sells hair oil and shaving soap. A man who sweeps for her says Leclerc carried boxes for her. He hasn't seen him since Tuesday. He thinks she has a sister, but everyone's sister is ill in winter sheaf. Maigret took these things and let them sit. Send an agent to fetch the fumigator's slip, he said. And another to the barber addresses, quietly. See if any parcels were refused. He glanced toward room 3. And put a man at the end of the corridor. No uniforms to frighten the house. Someone who can sit and be dull. He went back into room 6, not for the cord or the glass, but for the chair. He carried it into the corridor and set it where the stair brought the sound up from below. He sat with his weight arranged as if for a long railway journey. Madame Bordier, passing with purpose that had no destination, slowed. "You're waiting," she said, with that mixture of resentment and relief people have toward those who undertake the waiting for them. "I'm listening," he said. The house obliged with a recital of its small truths, the iron stove's contented hum, the arm of the clock taking its measured walk, the whisper of fabric where Mademoiselle Darras turned cloth in her hands. He watched the line of light under her door brighten and diminish, as if she were moving between the table and the window. He watched the door of room 4 open and close on the business of a glass of water. He watched nothing much. It was his craft. At 9, the agent returned with a card from the fumigator. "Tuesday last," the agent said. "Room 3 on the list. He left the crystals. Said he'd return next week to clear them. He gave a spare key to Madame, who was to replace it on his hook." "Where was the key?" Maigret asked. "On the hook," the agent said. "Hooks were innocent by habit." He sent him away and sat some more. The cord on the table in room 6 shed its faint soap smell into the corridor like a rumor. It wanted to belong to a parcel. It wanted to be the thing that had done harm. It had not done harm. It had held something ordinary in place until someone could make it seem ordinary elsewhere. At 9:30, the house offered what he had expected from it. Mademoiselle Darras opened her door with caution and stepped out with her rubbish pail. The small defeat of a woman doing the correct thing at the correct hour, because correctness keeps loneliness from noticing itself. She set the pail by the stair where Madame Bordier preferred them to be taken in the morning and turned to go back. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, then withdrew. She stood a moment in the corridor's thin light, not moving, as if listening to a question from inside herself. Then, quite deliberately, she reached into her pocket, drew out a small folded square of gauze and touched it to her cheek. Powder rose and dissolved. It left nothing to see, except the act of making neat what had been already neat. When she saw him, she did not start. She lowered her hand and put the gauze away. "Good evening, Inspector," she said. She had not called him Inspector before. It was as if naming him afforded her the protection of rules. "Good evening, mademoiselle." He did not stand. He was careful with his own movements, as if to show that stillness was something two people could agree to. "Did you remember anything?" She considered, then gave him a detail as simple as a button. He hummed, she said, "Monsieur Leclerc," in the evenings, the same tune 2 or 3 times. "I didn't know it, and I know many." She looked at the door to room 6 without looking like she was looking. "Yesterday I didn't hear it." "Thank you," he said, not because the tune mattered, but because the omission did. She went back into her room. The line of light was the same afterwards, but the air had learned a new habit, as air does when someone has taken a breath to steady themselves. The agent sent to the barber's brought back one address on a greasy card in a careful hand, Rue du Roi de Sicile, a barber called Gaspard, who had refused a delivery because he'd no room for samples and no patience for talk. Another had taken a brush and owed 2 francs. The third was closed for a funeral. The card had a pale smudge along one edge, as if it had been handled with powder-dusted fingers. At 9:45, the rain quickened again, making a soft vellum noise on the awning. Maigret rose and walked once more to room 3, put his ear to the panel and heard nothing except the house resting against itself. He had the feeling, neither welcome nor unwelcome, simply familiar, that what would break the case was not the next discovery, but the next person's attempt to preserve a small order against the encroachment of events. He could sometimes hasten that moment by asking for something ordinary. He went down to the hall and told Madame Bordier, who was arranging the umbrella stand as if it were an altar. "In the morning I will need coffee at 7. For the house. Put out cups in a pot. Tell your tenants we will not interfere with their routines." She looked at him, as if he had asked for the sea to be quieter. At 7. At 7. "People who didn't sleep talk best with coffee," he said. He picked up his coat and set it down again. The stove ticked as if approving. He thought of the woman with the felt hat, of the child pressing 2 fingers to the air, of a parcel that had rested very squarely on a dusty table, and then moved with the soft clink of coins kept still. He sat once more at his chair in the corridor, and let the house know he would be there when it decided to tell him which part of its tidiness had been arranged for show, and which part belonged to the lives it sheltered. The night wrapped itself around the house without incident. At some hour the morgue men came with their quiet leather and their sheet that had been laundered too often. They made the particular noises of men doing a necessary thing well, and the staircase accepted them the way old wood accepts a winter. When they had gone, the corridor returned to its small sounds, the tick of the stove cooling, the drag of a slipper along a floorboard, and Maigret sat until even those had grown sleepy. Near 1, he rose, told the agent at the door to keep his boredom intact, and went out into a rain that had grown finer and more determined, the kind that turns collars dark and fills the space under street lamps with a soft grain. He walked home and did not hurry. Window by window, Paris sank back into itself. At the corner, a woman in an apron leaned from a doorway to shake a cloth and drew her hand in at the feel of the wet. The apartment smelled of stew when he opened the door, and Madame Maigret, who had known his step all her life, came from the kitchen with a look that held both a chiding and its forgiveness. She reheated the pot without remark. He sat and watched the steam make a small curtain between them. "Shall I set another plate?" she asked. "I'll take a little," he said. He ate enough to show willing, and watched the way she wiped the edge of his bowl with her thumb without thinking. "You smell of soap and rain," she said, "not tobacco." Then, because he was quiet, "You have a serious look." He nodded, and when he spoke it was the way he always did with her, not a report but a way of fitting the day into words that did not muddy the food. "A man under a bed," he said, shoes lined up. A glass wiped and left damp, to be honest, a coat dry on a wet day, a room across the corridor that has been empty but not quite empty. Violets in the air, a woman who sells hair oils and does not like cases, a seamstress who keeps correct hours and corrects them again when they have not needed it, a child who knows the sound of coins. "Coins don't sing if you rap them," she said, as if to herself. She pared an apple with the small knife. He liked best, letting the peel fall in a single spiral that shone briefly and then dulled. "When I was a girl, I kept the change for the baker in a handkerchief because my father hated the noise at Mass. You can make coins quiet if you are used to it." He watched the coil of peel rest like a small snake on the plate. "She moved along the wall," he said. "Her child showed me." He pressed 2 fingers to the air to make a secret small. Madame Maigret smiled with one side of her mouth. "Women in houses learn to move that way," she said. "Less from fear than because we don't like to disturb people. Men don't mind their coats brushing a door. Women turn their shoulders." He did not reply at once. The apple knife made a slight gritty sound when she set it down. "You said a room for fumigating," she added. "Crystals. If I put those in a cupboard, I don't bring my good shawl near for 2 days. The smell takes. Hair tonics would take it, brushes. Those things keep a smell like a quarrel. Your woman with the felt hat would not thank herself if she stored a parcel there." He had not thought of that. He said so. She nodded, pleased to be useful. "And shoes," she said. "Lined heel to heel is what you do for someone else to see. Your mother, your landlady. For yourself, you push them where they won't be under your feet. Under a bed is a child's place. or a woman's when she is tired and thinking of sweeping. He looked at her with his weary affection. "Which is to say," he said, "that someone tidied what should not be tidied. It calms you," she said. "It calms a woman." He slept a few hours on the sofa, like a man who knows his back will complain and accepts it in advance. At 6 he shaved, the mirror fogging at the corners, and by 7 he was back in the Rue de Turenne, where the awning dripped steadily and the iron stove in the hall was taking thought again. Madame Bordier had done as asked. The dining room carried the thin cheer of a communal breakfast, cups in a row, a pot that made a friendly sound as it settled, slices of bread with their heels kept for the thrifty. The tenants came one by one as if to show they had nothing to hide, by showing nothing at all. Monsieur Rondeau appeared in a shirt with the firmness of a man who liked trains to run on time. He nodded without warmth and poured himself 2 fingers of coffee as if it were a ration. Madame Rondeau, pale and composed, handled the sugar as if it were a fragile commodity left over from a war. Mademoiselle Darras came last. She had pinned her hair again, but one fine strand refused to be governed and shone where it lay along her temple. She sat and cradled the cup between her palms, as if drawing its heat into her fingers. When she set it down, there was the faintest film on the lip, where powder had met porcelain, a delicate crescent that looked like a breath caught and kept. She reached for it with her thumb, and then thought better and folded her hands. Maigret did not ask questions at first. He spoke of weather and of a tram that had stalled by the Bastille the week before, making the whole city late. He asked Madame Bordier how long she had kept a stove that put up with so much, and whether the fumigator had been as reliable as his slip implied. He waited for the house to remember itself in front of him. When the cups were half empty and the pot was beginning to tire, he set his pipe beside his saucer and said to Mademoiselle Darras, "You do alterations. Do you have your work with you?" She blinked, startled by the harmlessness. "Always," she said, and from her bag she produced the small kingdom of her trade, a pincushion worn thin in one place, a tape with numbers rubbed pale at 12 and 18, a spool of thread the color of pale rose, a square of beeswax with a corner broken off. The thread caught the light with a familiar, almost indecent intimacy. He had seen that color in an ashtray. He let his eyes go to it and away. "Would you mend a button for me?" he asked, touching his coat in a place where no button was missing. She almost smiled. "If one wished," she said, and then, realizing the courtesy, asked more of her than she had to give. "There's nothing to mend." "You came to this table last night," he said very gently, as if it had been a kindness. "You drank coffee with him. Someone did," he corrected himself. "The cup left a little circle. No crime in that. Who would refuse a neighbor in the rain?" Madame Bordier made a small sound she did not mean to make. The Rondeaus looked at their bread. Mademoiselle Darras's fingers moved to the spool and steadied themselves on it, as if on a railing. "I was in my room," she said. It was not a denial. It was a habit spoken aloud. "Of course." He nodded. "And perhaps later you went into room 3. The fumigator's crystals are cruel to cloth. It's possible to put a parcel there and think it's safe, because no one would go in to look, except that a child has better lungs than we do." She looked up, and the look was angry, not at him, but at something that had failed her. "I don't take keys from hooks," she said. "If you think," "I think," he said, "that a woman told a child to be quiet because she did not want to wake the house." He did not press. He pressed rarely. "And I think a woman who breaks a cigarette not to waste it but to save it, and that the little powder on a cup comes from habit, not performance. I think also that a man who hums a tune every evening did not hum it last night. That is all I think this morning." The silence that followed was not the heavy kind people fill with explanations. It was the lighter sort that hunters use when their dogs are listening to the ground. Madame Rondeau, perhaps unable to bear the lightness, said, "There was a woman in the corridor, I told you. She said wait or late. If it was wait, perhaps he did not." "Perhaps," Maigret said. The agent who had been sent to the barber on the Rue du Roi de Sicile came to the door with his cap in his hands and a dampness that was not all rain on his forehead. "Gaspard the barber," he said, "remembers Leclerc. He says Leclerc asked to leave a box in the back because he was going to the cinema and didn't want to carry it. Gaspar refused. He says a woman came later asking if the box had been left after all. He turned her away. He recognized her description when I told him. What description? Maigret asked, though he already knew which hat the man would name. A small felt with a ribbon, the agent said. Violet scent. She did not give a name. Thank you, Maigret said. He poured the last of the coffee into his cup and did not drink it. The house had arranged its pieces again. The woman with the hat who would not let her goods learn the smell of crystals. The seamstress with a spool the color of a thread found in an ashtray. A parcel that had not wanted to be seen, and a child who had seen it anyway. He felt the next thing growing of its own accord, as grass pushes up between stones. It would not come of questioning. It would come of asking for something ordinary and waiting for someone to tidy too quickly. Madame Bordier, he said, in the tone of a man who had just remembered a convenience, will you have someone bring hot water to room 6? I'll shave there. The light is good. It wasn't, and she knew it, but it was an ordinary request, with a handle you could pick up without thinking. He saw Mademoiselle Dara's eyes flick to the door of room 6, and then to the stairs where room 3 waited with its sulking crystals, and he knew the morning would decide for him which of the house's tidy habits would come undone first. Madame. Bordier sent up a jug of hot water that steamed in the narrow beam from the window, and set out a shaving cup as if it were a visitor's saucer. Maigret loosened his collar and stood by the washstand in room 6, the mirror dull with the day's breath. He stropped his razor on the leather, with a sound that might have been a cat's contentment if a cat had learned patience from old policemen. He left the door ajar. The cord he had found lay where he had left it on the table, a thin, obedient line. The bed had been remade by someone who wanted beds to excuse the world. Footsteps came and hesitated in the corridor. They were not bold. They placed themselves where the boards remembered other feet. Then the light shifted, and Mademoiselle Daras appeared in the doorway, with the air of one arriving to do something, ordinary, and finding the wrong person already doing it. Madame said you wanted more hot water, she said, though the jug still steamed as if offended at the suggestion. She held a small folded towel in her hand, neatly edged, the kind of towel that had had a life in drawers. Thank you, Maigret said, and did not turn from the mirror at once. He brought the lather to his cheek in a slow, circular patience, and watched her in the glass as she looked at the bed, and then away, as if the bed were a person who might look back. She took a step in and with 2 fingers straightened the coverlet's hem where it had not needed straightening. The gesture was quick, the way one brushes a crumb from a child's lip. You needn't, he said mildly. I know, she said, and for the first time her voice had something of a plea in it. But it is not right, a bed like that. He drew the razor along his cheek and rinsed it, the water clouding with the day's faint beard. There were 2 cups here, he said, not as a question. Last night, she stood very still, as if movement would make a sound the house might overhear. I brought sugar, she said at last, in a voice that had learned secrecy from rooms. He had said he was out. I was going to the kitchen. I heard him cough. It is a small thing to leave sugar. You came in, I stood by the door. She lifted her chin the smallest amount, the way one offers a throat to a collar. He put the cup down. He said he was expecting... She stopped and began again elsewhere. He hummed in the evenings. Last night he was not humming. He was waiting in his chair. He had one shoe off. The other... She glanced at them now, lined heel to heel, and the guilt in her face was not of crime, but of tidying. I made them straight after, she said, and the after hung in the air like a damp handkerchief. After what? Maigret asked and dried his face without hurry. I don't know, she said, and then, because she did, after the house went quiet. I heard a woman in the corridor say, wait. It sounded like late. And then the radio went soft as if someone had put a hand on it. The steps came and went. I did not listen with my ear at the door. I listened with my hands. Do you understand? He nodded once. He understood the way women in houses learn the weight of people from the weight of air. I knocked later, she said, because the not humming was worse than a cry. No one answered. The door was not locked. He was not on the bed. The bed looked wrong. I did not look under. I would not. Her mouth flattened, ashamed of the refusal. The glass had a mark. I took my apron and... Her hands moved in a small clearing gesture. I made it right. It is not right to leave a glass that way. "You saw a hat," he said. He did not make it a question. He let it be a place where her sight could rest. Her eyes flicked to the peg, where the dry coat hung like an alibi. "On the chair," she said. "Before, when I brought the sugar." A small hat, with a ribbon that had seen better days. It was not his. He keeps his under his arm and leaves a circle on his coat. There was no circle last night, and later the chair was empty. Yes, the word came small and unadorned and faithful. I put the shoes straight. I took the cup because of the mark. I did not touch the chair. There was no hat to touch. He set down the towel and reached for his pipe but did not fill it. "Room 3, he said, as if recalling the number on a laundry tag. "You went there." She closed her eyes as if the number could be kept out like a draft. "I thought he might have gone there because of the crystals," she said. It was a poor construction and she knew it. Madam puts linen in there when she runs out of places. Sometimes she tells me to fetch. I am used to the smell. It doesn't ruin cotton if you are quick. I went to see if the window was open. It was not. There was nothing but the smell and the table, and a parcel. He kept his voice very light, like a waiter asking if the lady will have sugar. Her eyes opened, and in them was the kind of stubbornness that has protected a person more often than truth has. "I did not take boxes," she said. "I do not carry men's things in corridors at night." He did not say that a child had seen a woman do exactly that. He did not say the child had given the woman's gesture back to him with 2 small fingers. He lifted the thin cord from the table and laid it across his palm. "He was strangled with something like this," he said. "Not this, perhaps, but something that knew how to make itself narrow. This smelled of soap. It could have tied a parcel, or a life that has too few knots." She looked at the cord with a careful dislike, the way one looks at a hair that has fallen into a bowl. "I do not know cords," she said. "Only thread." He glanced at the spool in her pocket, which made no secret of itself. A small pale rose filament clung to the cloth at her seam, as if asking to be taken home. He put the razor away and buttoned his collar. She did not move to go. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the neatness it had worn like a good blouse. "It was indecent," she said abruptly. "The way he was. Not indecent like men are when they drink. Indecent like a room with a curtain not drawn when it should be. I could not leave it that way. If there is a scandal, Madame will suffer. They will say, 'Women come and go.' They will put mud on our doorstep. I did not want that." He did not tell her that scandal had already come up the stairs under a white sheet. He watched the tiny tremor that ran across the skin just in front of her ear, where a hat's brim would press. "You had coffee with him," he said. I held my cup. "He held his," she said. The radio spoke. "He did not. He said he was waiting. It is not criminal to wait. For whom?" "A woman," she said, like a person on the stand who refuses a name she cannot improve by saying. "A woman who smells of violets and carries strings the way some carry rosaries. She came before. She asked him for money sometimes. He would say he would have it when he took his hat to the barber's. It made no sense to me. Did you see her face?" "Only the part that does not look at women," she said with a tired scorn that did not quite hide a hurt. "She is the kind of woman who speaks to the man and lets the woman vanish like lint." He inclined his head. "She came earlier," he said. "She left something in room 3 and then came again to fetch it. It is possible she left in a hurry and forgot a hat." "Women do not forget hats," she said, and then, after a second, "unless they have taken hold of a man who is heavier than he should be. He did not move for a time. He listened to the house speaking in its thin morning voice. Below, the stove breathed. Somewhere a chair answered a floorboard with a complaint it had made for 20 years. When he looked at Mademoiselle Darras again, the neatness had run out of her. She stood with her hands nowhere, as if they had lost the habit of work. "I did not kill him," she said, not with defiance, but with a tired certainty that had finally found a place to sit. "I am not a woman men die for. I am a woman who keeps a seam straight." He nodded. "And when you saw him as he was, you made the room straight too." He let a little air into the next sentence. "Will you tell me very quietly if you took anything else from the room? A card? A photograph?" She stared at the wardrobe door, as if behind it was a place where her younger self had put away a dress that no longer suited her. "There was a picture on the table," she said slowly. "Not last night, before. A woman not pretty and not young, with a hat that had a ribbon." He looked at it sometimes like a man reads a label he knows by heart. "Yesterday it was in his pocket. I saw the corner when he reached for his handkerchief. He had a cold, she added, as if the small illness could be allowed to exist among the larger one. I did not take it. He believed her. He believed it because the picture had been folded twice and looked as if it had learned the shape of his wallet's shadow a long time ago. He picked up the cord and put it back where it had been. "Thank you," he said. "You will stay near this morning." She went out without apology or excuse. In the corridor, the house had gathered itself into a tentative calm again. He rinsed the basin and dried the razor, as a man finishes an ordinary task that has been asked to be useful to something larger. He looked once more at the bed, at the shoes that had been lined for someone else's eyes, at the empty peg where hats and their owners pretend to rest. Then he went down to the hall. Madame Villon had returned, hat firm on her head, the ribbon newly pinned as if to assert that a ribbon, once corrected, can erase what came before. She stood at the desk with an air that wanted to be business, and settled for brisk hope. "Inspector," she said, already starting to open her handbag as if a document might defend her, "I have remembered something. You asked for something ordinary. It may be nothing. But yesterday when I left I had the feeling—" She stopped and smoothed the glove over her knuckles. "No, not a feeling. The certainty that he had taken money from the drawer where I keep the small coins for change." Maigret looked at her, not at the hat. "He asked you for an advance," he said. "Yes." The word trembled and then behaved itself. "And I said next week." "But the coins were—" Quieter than they should have been. He saw Madame Maigret's apple peel glint and dull on a plate. Coins that do not sing. He did not ask her why a woman who notices coins would leave a parcel in a room that still smelled of crystals. He said, "And then?" "And then," she said, the violet at her throat gentler than last night, "I came back later to ask him not to come again. It is a difficult thing to say to a man who carries things for you. I did not knock. I saw nothing. I saw that the corridor was empty. I went home. It was late." She lifted her eyes and let them rest on his face like a weight she could no longer carry alone. "I did not kill him," she said with the same tired exactness as the seamstress had used. "I am not young enough for men to die for. I am old enough to know when to stop asking for help." The house, which had been waiting for someone to speak a sentence that would make the rest of the day possible, exhaled in the faint sigh a stair makes when a person releases their grip on the wall. He took his hat from the stand and did not put it on. "We will walk," he said to her, as if proposing a cure for nerves. "Just to the corner and back. You will tell me which drawer and how many coins and why you keep the ribbon when it has given up. On the way we will pass a barber who does not like cases. Perhaps he will remember your voice." She nodded and put her hand on her handbag with the authority of a woman locking a shop door. They stepped into the street where the rain had thinned to a stubborn mist that belonged to Paris more than to clouds. Behind them on the gallery, the child in the red cardigan watched and did not lean. The house had not finished talking, but it had decided to tell the truth in the way it preferred, piece by piece, not to save the guilty, but to make the ordinary livable again. They walked without speaking at first, the rain making a fine hiss along the shop fronts, the awnings dripping at a pace that matched footsteps. Madame Villon kept her handbag tucked in close, the way women do when they are thinking of money and of being seen thinking of money. At the corner, the barber's striped pole turned with the steady idleness of a thing that must turn whether there are heads to shave or not. Inside, the warmth had a clean smell, soap and damp cloth and the faint iron note of scissors. Gaspard, a spare man with a manner that suggested hair did not surprise him, looked up and set his comb down carefully on the towel, as if that too could tell the time. He had the kind of eyes that keep their opinion behind a glass. When Maigret asked about the box, he moved his mouth as if tasting a word before using it. "He came," he said. "He always has a word, your man. He hums. You hear it even when he isn't. He asked to leave a box by the sink. I said no, I don't keep other men's samples. They belong to their pockets." He laughed and said the cinema won't seat a man with a box. And later, "A lady," Gaspard said. Felt hat. Ribbon that remembers its youth. She asked if a box had been left. I said no. She seemed to know that before I said it. He glanced at Madame Villon as if at a mirror that had been given a new frame. She did not come in. She kept to the door like someone who has had a quarrel with the smell of phenol. Some people are like that. Tonics make them think of hospitals. "She spoke to you?" Maigret asked. "Softly," he said. Women who ask for things without wanting to own the asking talk softly. Outside again, the rain had become a fine dust. At the tobacconist, a bell gave a tired clink. The man behind the counter had fingers stained the clean brown of tobacco. He did not take long to remember faces. Shopkeepers rarely do. Leclerc bought the cheap dark cigarettes 2 at a time and matches when he had coins. He did not chatter. The tobacconist had not taken a message for him. A woman with violets on her scarf came sometimes for cork tips and never asked for anything else. He did not think her a messenger. He did not think her a liar. He did not think of her much at all, and he said so with the particular pride of a man whose day cannot be altered by hats. They went next to the little shop near the temple. It had a bell that was livelier than the one at the tobacconist, and shelves that had learned to hold bottles in straight lines. Labels promised tonics that would coax hair into obedience, and soap that would smell like a better life. Behind the counter, a drawer with a brass ring stuck a little when Madame Villon pulled it. She looked at her hand while she did it, as if wanting her fingers to know they were being watched. Coins lay in 2 small sachets, one for francs, one for centimes, each with the indentation that years make. She stirred them with her forefinger. They made a sound like rain on leaves, a quiet sound. How much was there? Maigret asked. Enough for change, she said, and the word enough had in her mouth the careful edges of a thing counted often. She lifted a little saucer where hairpins lay and showed him the shadow underneath, a pale circle where coins had rested. There were always more than this, she said, not accusing him of believing, only telling him where her belief had put its hand. He did not ask how often she measured the difference between what should be and what was. He looked at the hat on the peg behind the counter, the twin of the one she wore. Same felt, same idea for the ribbon, but the pin was different, a plain nickel head where the other had a black bead. He reached out as if to steady it against the bell's little wind. "You mend your own hats?" he asked. She smiled without amusement. "I mend what I can," she said. "When it is beyond me, there is a young woman in the house who does hems. She put a stitch in the ribbon last week. It holds." She touched the ribbon with one gloved knuckle, the way a person touches a scar that has become part of their map. He noticed, without knowing yet where to store it, that a fine strand the color of pale rose clung to the corner of the counter, where customers set their hands. He brushed it free and it floated down like a thought. "You knew her before?" he asked. "No," she said. "We nod because women nod in hallways. She keeps her door polite." She closed the drawer and the coins made a brief, obedient murmur. If he took some, he did it quickly. "He knows the sound to make it seem less. Does he carry string?" Maigret asked. She looked at him then as if surprised by the size of the world beyond her bottles. "Men always have string," she said. "For bundles." For once the parcel was done. She looked at her own hands and added, "I keep mine for the morning. I don't tie things at night." He bought a small bottle he did not need. It smelled faintly of violets that had learned to live in shops. When they stepped out again, the street felt as if it had been washed twice. A tram clanged its way past and left behind the same weary note as the barber's comb laid down. "You came back last night," he said, as if asking about weather. "You came as far as the doorway and then went home." She nodded decisively and then, because decisiveness invited a question, she added, "When a woman comes to speak to a man in a boarding house, she knows what people will say, even if she has come for ordinary reasons. It takes more courage than a parcel is worth." They walked in silence to the corner and then turned back. He did not hurry. He looked at the shutters, at the gutters' clean mouths, at a cat that sat in a doorway with its paws tucked under, as if protecting its own heat. He had the feeling, not for the first time in his life, that the facts were not being concealed so much as put away in correct drawers. Coins here, ribbons there, by people who had learned that tidiness was the only defense against the day. At the boarding house, Lognon was waiting in the hall with a paper in his hand, and damp shoulders he had not noticed. "The identity," he said with a prickly pleasure at having something that might be a conclusion. "Leclerc is Georges Leclerc is given. Traveling agent for brushes and combs, 3 years. Before that, small clerkship. No military record of note. No prison, a sister in Chartres. No known wife. The photograph could be the sister." Or not, Maigret agreed. He took the paper and folded it once and then once again, so that it would fit an inside pocket and cease to be a proclamation. "Keep a man at the shop," he added. Not at the door inside, buying nothing. If anyone comes to ask for a box, he will look at the ceiling as if the plaster were admirable. He went up 2 flights without needing the banister and paused at room 4. Monsieur Rondeau opened promptly, as if punctuality had been at his ear. "A question," Maigret said. "Last night when you went for water, did you see a hat on the chair in room 6? Rondeau blinked once. He blinked that way when a question did not fit into his schedule. "No hats," he said. "Doors don't show hats." Madame Rondeau, behind him, shook her head with the settled certainty of someone who notices furniture because it tells her where dust will be. He thanked them and continued along the corridor. The line of light under Mademoiselle Daras's door was firm. He knocked and she opened at once, as if she had been looking toward it. Her needle was threaded. She held the work to keep it from dropping its memory of a hem. "Do you mend hats for Madame?" he asked. "When she asks," she said, and her voice contained the faint scorn women keep for one another's frugality. "Her ribbon won't hold. The felt is tired. You saw her last week?" "I saw her hat," she said. "Hats are like voices. You know them without seeing the mouth." He nodded and did not ask more. He went to room 3 and stood with his ear to the panel. The crystal's smell had become something else, less chemical, more like a place that has decided to belong to itself again. He went in and crossed to the chair where the string had cut a groove. He laid the thin cord across it, and without thinking tied a simple parcel knot, the kind that holds because it is not complicated. He undid it, then tied it again, this time the way he had seen barbers tie their aprons, 2 quick motions, a tuck that made the line lie flat. He stood looking at it in his hands, as if it was something a man might say when he did not know what else to say. From the landing came the light fall of steps that want to be lighter than they are. He put the cord down and went out. Madame Villon had come as far as the 2nd floor turn and stopped. She had the look of someone who has forgotten the reason she began to climb, and would like the stairs to suggest one. "I left a receipt with Madame," she said too brightly, and then let the brightness fall because it cost her. "Caillou will find me at the shop." He nodded and watched her go down again, her hand on the polished part of the rail that had learned the shape of many hands. When she had gone, he became aware, in the way one becomes aware of a draft, that the child in the red cardigan was back at his post across the courtyard, chin sunk in his wrists, eyes as grave as if watching a church. The boy lifted a finger, the small shh again, but this time the gesture was not secrecy. It was warning. Then he pointed with the same finger not at room 6, not at room 3, but downward, toward the space between the stairs and the cupboard where mops live. It was the sort of pointing children do only when they are sure, from long experience, that adults have not yet looked in the place where things hide that do not want to be counted. Maigret did not hurry. He went down step by step, feeling the house in his knees, and when he reached the half landing he stood a moment with his hand on the wall. The cupboard door had a keyhole shiny with use, and a key that sat too comfortably in its throat. He turned it. The smell that came out was of soap and wet wood, and the idea of violets so faint it might have been memory. On the shelf, exactly the size of the rectangle of dust in room 3, stood a parcel tied without fuss, string ends tucked neatly under. The label, written in a hand that did not spend its days with men, said only, "Samples." The parcel sat on the shelf as if it had always belonged there, its corners firm, the string tucked so neatly that the knot seemed more decorative than practical. Maigret did not touch it at first. He let the cupboard breathe its stale, damp air, watched the way the paper darkened at the folds from moisture that had found its way in. He looked at the handwriting on the label, round, deliberate, not a salesman's quick scrawl. The kind of hand that had been taught to copy evenly on school slates and never lost the habit. A woman's hand, most likely. He closed the cupboard without locking it and climbed back to the 2nd floor where the house was waiting for his next gesture. At the desk, Madame Bordier was straightening the register, though there was nothing to write. He asked her for a knife. She fetched one from the kitchen, wiping it on her apron with the air of a woman who knows knives are too sharp for comfort. He carried it back to room 6, set the parcel on the table, and slit the string carefully as if undoing a bandage. Inside, the brushes lay in their paper sleeves, bristles pale as straw, combs wrapped 2 to a pack, and 3 small bottles of tonic. One had leaked slightly, staining the paper with a ring the color of weak tea, and when he lifted it, the faint scent of violets rose again. Not the perfume from a scarf, but the kind that clung to liquid in a bottle. It was a smell that would travel on fingers, onto ribbons, into rooms. He replaced everything exactly, tied the string with the same knot, and set it aside. What interested him was not what was inside, but where it had been hidden. Room 3 had shown its rectangle of dust. The cupboard now confessed to sheltering the same box. Someone had shifted it in the night, unwilling to risk leaving it where it might be noticed. A parcel of samples was nothing by itself, yet it had taken a path through the house like a character in a play that could not find its line. He lit his pipe, tamped the bowl slowly, and opened the window. The rain had lessened, but the courtyard glistened. The child was gone. Only a line of laundry on the gallery opposite flapped damply, shirts that looked too narrow for the air they were asked to catch. He drew smoke, let it linger, then tapped it gently out. At 9, he asked Longyon to bring both women to the dining room. Madame Villon arrived first, with her handbag still clutched like a shield. She had repinned her hat again, though the ribbon sagged in defeat. Mademoiselle Darras followed a minute later, her spool of thread still in her pocket, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, as if to remind herself she belonged to fabric, not to murder. They sat opposite each other, not looking, though the air between them thickened with the unspoken. "There is a parcel," Maigret said simply. "It contains brushes, combs, bottles. It has moved from one room to another, and then to a cupboard. I would like to know who moved it and why." Neither spoke. Madame Villon shifted her glove against her wrist until the faint squeak of leather made the silence less bearable. Mademoiselle Darras looked up then, and for the first time she looked directly at the other woman, as though a line that had always been kept between them was suddenly visible. "It is hers," she said quietly. Madame Villon's lips tightened. "It is my stock," she admitted, "but it was not my hand that put it in that cupboard. I trusted him to carry it, and he did not return. What would people think if they found my goods in a man's room after he—" She stopped, the handbag quivering faintly in her lap. "And you, mademoiselle?" Maigret asked. "I saw it once," she said, in the same tone she might use to describe a seam undone. "On his table. He did not wish me to." He moved his hand quickly as if to cover it. Afterwards I went into room 3. It was there then. I thought perhaps he had left it for someone to fetch. I did not touch it. The smell was strong enough. "Someone moved it again in the night," Maigret said, "to the cupboard by the stairs." "Not you?" "No," she said, and the denial had the clean weight of truth, though truth could still be incomplete. Madame Villon's gloved fingers twisted the string of her handbag until it bit into the skin beneath. "Inspector, I cannot be seen to have connections with a death. My shop depends on trust. A widow cannot afford whispers. And yet," Maigret said, "you came to his room. You looked for the parcel. You admitted as much at the barber's. You feared more than whispers. You feared he had kept something back. Kept something back. Kept—" Her eyes flickered, not to him but to the spool of thread peeping from the seamstress's pocket, and something bitter passed across her face like a shadow of an old quarrel. "He promised me returns," she said. "Always next week, always after the barbers had coins. But coins do not multiply with promises. He took what he could, and when I asked, he smiled. That smile, it was as though my needs were a child's game. Did you threaten him?" Maigret asked. She met his gaze then squarely with a frankness that did not suit her hat. "Yes," she said. "I said if he did not settle, I would take back what was mine. I came with that purpose, but he was already beyond settling." Maigret tamped his pipe again, though it was not lit. He let the silence absorb her words, then asked, "You smelled violets in his room." Her lips parted, closed, opened again. "I thought it was from the tonic," she said too quickly. "It clings. Too strong for a bottle," Maigret murmured. "More like from a scarf pressed against the chair. Perhaps from a woman who leaned too close." Mademoiselle Darras flushed, then paled, the color moving across her face like thread through cloth. "I told you, Inspector, I left sugar." "Nothing else." "Yes," he said, "and you made the shoes neat. And you wiped the glass. You straightened the bed, but you left the chair, because the chair told you what you did not wish to name." Her eyes filled with a weariness too old for her age. "I am not the one," she whispered. "I am not." He believed her. But he knew too that tidiness had been the house's defense, and tidiness had hidden the act as surely as any alibi. He dismissed them gently, told them to go about their morning. They rose without looking at one another, their skirts brushing as they passed the narrow doorway, and he saw how one stiffened and the other bent slightly, each refusing to yield but neither pushing. When they were gone, he poured himself coffee from the pot that had gone bitter with sitting. He drank it anyway, staring at the parcel on the table. It was not valuable, yet it had been carried, hidden, shifted, protected like something more than brushes and bottles. It was a burden people had wanted to place elsewhere, to tidy out of their sight. He thought of the photograph in the wallet, of the hat with the tired ribbon, of coins that had gone quiet. He thought of a man who hummed until he was told to wait, and then did not hum again. The house was still. The child had not reappeared. Somewhere a radio crackled with the midday news, the voice tinny through walls. Maigret tapped his pipe against the saucer, leaned back in his chair and felt the slow certainty building in him. The parcel was not the key, it was only the broom with which someone had tried to sweep away their part in what had happened. What mattered was the silence that followed the word wait, and the hands that had known how to place shoes, heel to heel so that the world would look, at least for a while, as though nothing had been disturbed. Maigret waited until the house had the slow calm of late morning, when people begin to believe the day will not ask more of them. He carried the parcel back to the dining room and set it on the checked cloth. He untied the string and tied it again, not well. The ends stuck up like whiskers. "I haven't the fingers for neat work," he said, as if excusing an old clumsiness. "Madame, would you fix it for me? I'd rather it didn't come undone if I have to carry it." Madame Vion did not hesitate. Habit moved her hands before caution did. She drew the string tight with 2 quick motions and tucked the ends under with a small inward flick. The same tidy fold the cupboard parcel had worn, the same little confidence of a person who has tied 1,000 small promises. The knot lay flat, modest, correct. Mademoiselle Darras, watching, looked down at her own fingers as if remembering they belonged to a different trade. Maigret turned the parcel and let it sit. "When coins are kept in a drawer," he said conversationally, "they chatter if you're not careful. My wife wraps them in a corner of cloth. It's a trick from church." He did not look at either woman. He looked at the parcel's brown paper. "A child told me he saw a lady go slow like when coins don't want to sing." Something flickered at the corner of Madame Vion's mouth. It was not fear. It was the small grimace of a person seeing themselves do something they had meant never to do again. She smoothed the ribbon on her hat with the back of a gloved knuckle and kept her gaze on the table. The violet on her was fainter today, as if she had rinsed a scarf. "I will need statements," Maigret said, still mild. "But before that, there is something to put in order. Last night someone went to room 6. Someone told him to wait." The radio softened. There were 2 cups. After, the room was tidied by hands that know how to make a thing look like it has always been that way. Mademoiselle Darras sat straighter, as if to claim her small guilt, so that the larger one might not be placed on her. "I wiped the glass," she said, and the steadiness in her voice had cost her. "I put the shoes." I did not touch his face. "I am not made for that, no," Maigret said. "You are made for hems." He turned to the other woman. "Madame?" She did not answer at once. She opened her handbag and then closed it on emptiness. When she spoke, it was with a precision that made the words small and bearable. "He owed me," she said. "Not fortunes. Small things. The kind of owing that grows like dust." She lifted her eyes to his for 1 second, then put them away again. "I said I would not send him out again with my stock." He laughed. He had the kind of laugh that is nothing by itself, but put against a woman alone it weighs. "The parcel," Maigret said. "You took it from his table." "I did," she said simply. "I put it in the empty room because you don't put bottles near crystals." "I have sense." "I meant to fetch it in the morning when the hall would be full, and the light would make everything ordinary again. A woman's safety is inordinary. He said I was silly." She pressed her glove where the skin beneath remembered the string of a handbag. "I asked for the coins. He said there were no coins." "There were. I could hear them the way you hear rain before it begins." "And then?" he asked, because he always asked for the step people do not think to mention. "I took the string from the parcel," she said, and the words came out flat, like a receipt read aloud. "I thought if I tied the drawer shut he would stop going to it." He stood up. He took my wrist. Not roughly. not as men do in stories. As if I were something light he could set aside. He smiled again. Her eyes drifted to the window with its wet square of courtyard. I wanted him to stop looking at me. I put the string across to push him back. He put his hand up and the string, it was under his fingers and then it wasn't. I don't know how long. There are things you cannot time with a wall clock. She sat very still. When he fell, he did not fall like a man drunk. He fell like laundry, no one spoke. The stove in the hall ticked. A tram far off complained to its rails. Mademoiselle Darras had her hands folded, but the thread had looped itself once around her smallest finger, as if to hold on. I did not mean to kill him, Madame Villon said. I meant to make him take me seriously for 1 minute. I am a widow. Men let widows last. She swallowed, and the violet rose and fell. I put them, because my mother put shoes that way when she was tired. I wiped the glass because a ring looks neglected. I do not leave rings. I took my hat because a woman without a hat is spoken about. I told the child to be quiet because he is a child, and he will tell a story like a bird sings if you don't teach him how to listen to his own voice. You moved the parcel again, Maigret said. To the cupboard. In the middle of the night, she said. I woke and thought of it there with the crystals, and I could not lie down with that in my head. I came without a light. I went slow. Coins sing even when they are in a cloth if you forget yourself. He let the air rest on that. Who smoked, he said, not accusing, only arranging facts. Cork tips. You broke 2. You left a powder mark on a cup. She looked down at her gloves. I am not a woman who leaves few traces, she said, and for a moment there was the ghost of a wryness that had belonged to her before life rearranged the furniture. But women's traces look like housekeeping. People think that is all we do. He did not ask why she had not called for help. He knew already. A woman alone, violet on her, a parcel with her label on it, a dead man under a bed. There were explanations, but they would not have been heard in the right order. He stood and walked to the window and came back again, as if giving the room time to agree with what had been said. Will you write it? He asked. In your hand? You have a good hand. It will be legible at the first reading. She nodded. I will write what I can bear to read, she said. The rest you must understand without my saying. He placed paper and left the room. In the corridor, the printed flowers on the wallpaper had begun to curl at one corner. Damp or time. He went to room 6 and stood where the bedstead's iron pressed cold through cloth. He bent, not to look under the bed. There was nothing to see there now, but to look at the dust arcs again. They were the tracks of hesitation. Push, then stop, then push again. Tidiness had a rhythm even in panic. A rhythm even in panic. A rhythm. On the landing he met Lognon, whose face wore the expression of a man who has found that he has been right and wrong in the same hour. So? Lognon asked. She will write, Maigret said. Robbery, then. Not robbery. He looked past Lognon to the stair that went down to the cupboard, where the parcel had rested between being a thing and being evidence. Not love either, he added, and saw the disappointment pass through Lognon like a draught. A woman's need to be treated as a person in her own shop. A man's habit of laughing when he has nothing better to give. It goes badly in the report, Lognon muttered. It goes well enough in life, Maigret said, and life is longer than reports. He waited in the hall until Madame Villon came with the paper folded once, then once again, the way he had folded the identity note. She handed it to him with both hands, as if giving a fragile object into someone else's keeping. Mademoiselle Darras had not moved from the dining room, her cup set untouched, a fine crescent on its lip where powder had been. She spoke without rising. "Will there be noise?" she asked. "There will be footsteps," he said. "And a door." He looked toward room 3. "Keep your crystals in their saucer until next week. It's better that way." Outside, the rain had decided to stop pretending to be mist and return to being rain, honest and thin. The child in the red cardigan stood in the gallery doorway, not leaning. He watched the men come and did not speak. Someone had shown him how to keep stories safe by holding them inside. At the desk, Maigret signed the necessary things. He did not hurry. He said to Madame Bordier, "You run a respectable house," and she nodded gratefully at the sentence that restored her to herself. In the street he put on his hat and did not pull it low. He walked to the café on the corner and sat by the window. The beer, when it came, was not cold. He cradled it anyway, watching the people who were ordinary and wanted only to stay so. He did not think of triumph. He thought of a string that had done what a hand could not do alone, and of a laugh that had been asked to stop. He thought of coins wrapped in cloth, and of shoes put heel to heel for someone else's eye. And when he lit his pipe at last, it tasted faintly of violets for a moment, as if the day had decided to keep a small trace of what it had been asked to understand. The rain had settled into a fine drizzle again by the time Maigret left the café. He walked slowly, hat low, pipe warm in his teeth. The case had ended without spectacle, just as he knew it would. There had been no chase, no shouted confession, only the quiet folding of paper into his pocket, written in a careful hand that tried to soften its own guilt. Madame Vian had gone with the officers, her head bent slightly, not in shame but in resignation. She had asked once if her shop could remain open, and he had told her someone would see to it. She hadn't argued. Widows learned quickly which questions the world would not answer kindly. The boarding house on Rue de Turenne had already resumed its old rhythm. Madame Bordier was at her desk, her mouth firm, her register straightened once more. The rondos kept their door closed, the cough muffled in handkerchiefs. Mademoiselle Darras returned to her thread, her radio low, stitching hems as if each neat line could hold the house together. Even the child in the red cardigan had retreated indoors, leaving the gallery bare. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The room still smelled of boiled potatoes and sawdust, but in each corner lay the memory of shoes lined too neatly, of a glass wiped to honesty, of a parcel carried from room to room like a guilty thought. It would fade, as such things do, until only the walls remembered. And walls, Maigret knew, rarely told tales. He stood in room 6 one last time before leaving, not looking under the bed, but at the coverlet, the chair, the peg where the coat hung. There was nothing remarkable about it now, only an empty room waiting for another tenant, with another story that would be ordinary until the day it wasn't. He touched the iron bedstead with the back of his knuckles, the way a man greets a familiar companion, and turned away. Outside, Paris moved with its usual indifference. Trams clanged, bicycles splashed, shutters opened to let in what little light the sky offered. Maigret walked among it all, a heavy man with a pipe, blending into the city he had spent his life listening to. He felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness that so many deaths were born not of evil, but of small human needs, respect, dignity, the wish to be taken seriously for once. At the Brasserie Dauphine, he sat at his place by the window and ordered another beer. He did not read the paper. He watched the street, the ordinary comings and goings of people with errands, umbrellas, parcels, and coins in their pockets. Madame Maigret would be waiting with supper later. He would tell her the case was done and she would nod, and together they would speak of it only in pieces, the way they always did, so that it would rest quietly between them. He lifted his glass and took a long, thoughtful drink. The case of the corpse under the bed in room 6 was finished, and yet, as always, not finished at all, because the truth of it lay not in the report, nor in the confession, but in the silence of a man's laugh stopped too late, and in the small ways people tried to tidy the world so it would look, for just a little longer, as if nothing terrible had happened at all. And with that thought, Maigret exhaled smoke toward the rain-smeared window and let the city carry on around him, knowing it always would.